go over this last set of slides for today, where I will show how to iterate all the ways we can iterate over an array list. So I'm going to go through this really quickly because most of these ways you should be intimately familiar with, but the goal of having this particular slide deck is as a reference point for you so that you could see and have access to all the ways that you can iterate across an array, but what you've learned in 1583 and what you're currently learning now in 2120. So effectively, there are 5 different ways you can retrieve elements from a collection object. And so you can use a for loop. A for loop will always work on a collection object. You can use an enhanced for loop. You can use a while loop. You can use an iterator, and you can use a list iterator. And so these first 3 you should be familiar with from your first programming class from Computer Science 1583, and you should be familiar now with these latter 2 from today's lecture. And so here's the general syntax for a for loop. Again, this is simple enough where I'm not going to spend too much time. It's just, you have your initialization, your condition, your step, and then whatever's in your loop body. Some sample code of a for loop on a collection. I'm not going to bother running it because it's simple enough that everyone should be familiar. If you're not, please ask any questions, but I'm going to assume that everyone's pretty familiar with for loops and enhanced for loops. Enhanced for loops have are a little bit different in the structure. They use the colon. They can take a collection on the right side of the colon, and then they create a local variable on the left side of the colon. And that left side, the enhanced for loops are good for reading the values of a collection, whereas the for loop can both read and write into a collection. But you can use both to be able to iterate across a collection. And again, this is just some sample code of how a enhanced for loop actually looks. And here's an actual application that you can run. And this would be the output. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time walking through that because I don't want to waste your time. But if you have questions about either the for loop or enhanced for loop, I can address that. The while loop is another way where you define your initialization. You create a while statement that has a condition, and then you would have your loop control variable that increments until you hit a false position. Again, this would be example code of how you can use a while loop to walk across an array. And here's a sample program that you can actually test and run out. So you can use this right inside of IntelliJ if you want. And this is the example output. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time looking at while loops, for loops, and enhanced for loops because I'm just going to assume you're comfortable with that. And then how do we iterate with an array list using Iterator? Well, we already know that the methods available to us using the iterator is has, next, next, and remove. This is the unidirectional iterator. This only goes in the forward direction. And we've seen example code today for this. But I have another example here that I'll include. It's the Iterate ArrayList 3. So I also have the sample code. So all the samples here for like the while loop, the enhanced for loop, with the loop, like this is my example 1, this is my example 2, this is my example 3, I'll make available inside of the GitHub repo. So if you want to just go ahead and review over these methods on how to read over an array list, how to do this on a collection in general, right? It doesn't have to be an array list in particular. Then feel free to play around with these applications. But I'm just going to treat this as a quick overview of all the different methods that you have in your toolbox for walking across an array. And it's important to know this, though, in the instance, if you ever had to if you had to create your own iterator, like if you wanted to design your own iterator, you could bank on using for loops and enhanced for loops and things like that. If you're building your own data type, it's important to know, well, what are my building blocks for how these iterators are constructed? And at the end of the day, an iterator object is relying on while loops, for loops, and enhanced for loops. So it's just to highlight that what you've already learned is accessible, it's usable, but iterators are a more powerful, compact thing to do that same thing. But if you go to data structures and you have to build your own list, and then your list has to deliver an iterator, then understand you would do that by implementing the logic of being able to know whether there's an element ahead of you, and if there is, how to iterate to the next one. That would be our output. Adding an element using iteration here, we've already seen this. Again, if we have iterator here, we can go to next, then we can go to add. And here, this particular instance will throw an exception, and that throws an exception simply because we're trying to add in the wrong way, right? So here, when you make a program, this particular one is going to use what's called fail fast during the iteration of elements. Let's take a quick look at what's happening here. So we're going to import ArrayList. We're going to import Iterator. We're going to create a class, Iterate ArrayList 4. It'll have a main method. We're going to create a new ArrayList to hold strings. Actually, let's go ahead and use the diamond operator. Let's add lion, tiger, elephant, and bear strings. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get an iterator from there, and then we'll walk across there. We're going to get the next element. And then what we're going to try to do is we're actually going to try to add an element using the array list. And this is actually going to throw a concurrent modification exception. And that's because we're trying to add an element while we have an iterator walking across it. And so since the iterator and the list are tightly pieced together, since they're aware of each other, when we try to mutate the list while we're using iterator to traverse it, is actually going to throw us an error that prevents that. So here you'll see that we get a concurrent modification exception. You can't modify using the array. If we wanted to do that, we'd have to use the iterator to insert that so that the iterator can track those changes. Otherwise, if you add to the array using an array method, not the iterator method, the iterator would fall out of sync with the array. It would change the state. And so it wouldn't have the known set of values. And that's why we want to use remove, set, and add using the iterator while we're walking across our collection, because that way it can track the changes as you're mutating the state of your collection. And then finally, iterate the array list using the ListIterator. We've seen this already. This is the fifth and final way. And then I give some more sample code that you can go ahead and play around with. And there's nothing really too interesting with the sample code. It's doing what we've already seen, where it creates a array of strings and then it steps through in the forward directions and steps backwards. I'm going to give another sample code here where you use the generics in the program, which it's what we've been doing, right? So a ListIterator, that's string, and has next. And so here, nothing unusual with what's happening here, right? We're just going ahead and calling the sets and removes and add methods. And then finally, on this last example code that I'm going to give to you on this slide deck is where we're going to create a program where we'll add the elements from 0 to 9 with a for loop, but then we'll iterate from a specific element 4 in the list. And so I don't know if I had shown that. Let's see here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and import ArrayList. We're going to import our ListIterator. We're going to create a class, Iterate ArrayList 7, a main method. We're going to create a new ArrayList that holds integers. We're going to add those integers into our ArrayList. So from 0 to 9, including 9, we'll print out the state of our ArrayList. We'll create a ListIterator. So notice this is the first time you can see that we can also put a numerical value, an integer, into the method that generates a iterator for us. And if we put a number in there, it'll actually start the iterator at that index. So here, this will grab the fourth element. So now if we do a while, if we use the while loop to say, hey, do we have another element inside of our list? And if we go ahead and get that and print it out, you'll see that we start at 4, right? So because our iterator starts at 4, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we also have this code where we try to throw this concurrent modification exception. And that's happening right here. While we're trying to step through it, we're trying to add, not using the iterator, but using the array list itself. And again, you can't do that. If you're using an iterator to walk across your collection, you have to do the insert using the iterator and not the actual collection. Excellent. And I think that that is pretty much all I can cover today in terms of collections, but I think we're making great progress. The collection framework is a huge framework, but let me ask now, does anyone have any questions about the iterator class, the ListIterator class, or all of the approaches that you have, all the tools you have to be able to walk across a collection, whether that be a for loop, a while loop, an enhanced for loop, an iterator, or a list iterator? Or does everyone seem pretty good with these concepts? Well, if there's no questions, then I will go ahead and end today's lecture. And I guess I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.